Anyone have a take on Bitcoin's latest slump in price, which is really just what, like 12, 13% below the recent all-time high?
Yeah, we're so weak with dips now, right? We get so it's crazy. We're like retesting kind of the previous high, right? Basically, or the high from earlier this year. So I mean, I it does seem like Bitcoin is weak I mean, I think you guys talked about it last week that Bitcoin is like usually weak in August and September, right? Is that all markets or is that just Bitcoin? Because it looks like the S&P is at an all-time high.
Yeah, I think you're referencing the Bitwise chart, the seasonality piece, but
Yeah.
it typically is pretty light for August and September. August definitely being negative, and then September being fairly light as well. So,
Yeah.
but after that, if you look October, November,
and
December, fairly strong. So
Yeah.
to Q's point, it's
we call it October and Moonvember, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things. Yeah, to Q's point, you look at this in the show's had a lot of conversation of all the different bullish sentiment, but it's like, okay, has the narrative changed? The answer is no. Like, there's a lot of good things that are still out there. And I was trying to think of the tweet. Was it the Strive folks that are getting close to their vote and then saying how many days before they unlock to start buying a healthy amount of Bitcoin?
Yeah, 750 million, I think, or something, and they're aiming for the autumn. So yeah, the treasury company buys aren't stopping, but it does seem like long-term holders, and I mean this happens every bull market, but long-term holders in whales have been selling, right? So that obviously is going to be the battle between the supply and demand for the bull. But if you want to go to this chart, John, this is like the long-term holder realized profit. And it's basically the highest point since 2017, 18, it looks like here. But one thing that's interesting about this one is the base of the black here on the right, which is quite a bit thicker than the other one. So it looks like the selling started quite a bit earlier for long-term holders and, kind of in the run up to 100K. That might mean that that their selling runs out a little bit earlier and we kind of go on a run. But what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I think this one also plays nicely with another image that we're going to show, or just a tweet really about some of the whales selling. And there's this kind of theory that it's kind of impossible to confirm this theory definitively, but there's this theory that maybe some of the and it's going to be mixed, right? There's not one answer, but some of the whales might be selling because they've guaranteed yachts for their great grandkids, and whatever, that's fine. But some of them might be selling and actually just diversifying the way they hold Bitcoin, maybe for custody reasons, for inheritance planning reasons, and maybe they're rotating back into the ETF. And we have to remember that I already listed one of the benefits, but it's just diversification. If you own 2 Bitcoin, you're not really thinking, let me split up this 2 Bitcoin in, this much in an ETF, this much here, this much in a multi. You're not doing that calculus. If you own thousands of Bitcoin, we're talking about OGs here, then you probably are doing that calculus. You're saying, hey, I don't want a catastrophic failure for all of my Bitcoin. I'll put 20% of it in this format, 20% in this format. And then Isaiah, I think you want to chat a little bit about not just diversification of custody, but there are some benefits, financialization benefits to owning the ETF that I think you've heard directly from clients.
Yeah, the one thing that I've heard for a handful of people is if they want to take loans or use margin, they can go to a brokerage, whether it's Interactive Brokers, Schwab, et cetera, and they can get margin a lot less expensive than doing the traditional kind of Bitcoin-backed loans where rates are at today. Maybe this changes in the future. And depending on how they want to use that Bitcoin or how they kind of mentally think about it, yes, we all know it's not real Bitcoin. They have a dollar claim to it. They can't actually redeem and get back to that Bitcoin without a sale, but it allows them to have exposure dollar-wise to the asset, borrow, and maybe acquire other things or use it for life. And so I think, yeah, there's a number of different people. BitPayne talks about it, but there's others that have looked at this and said, hey, if someone wants to borrow, this is actually going to save them a lot, and they can actually get more leverage by doing it that way. And I think there's something to that, because those are conversations that I've had and I've heard from people asking and trying to understand how they want to use it. And it's going to just depend on the individual and how much they value owning the underlying asset and being able to take self-custody versus, having it be custodial.
Yeah, I think a lot of these whales aren't. It's not like, if they were a whale and they've been a believer of Bitcoin for a long time, I don't think they're selling 100% of their stack. Like, if you look at this total here, like the band at the bottom, the darker orange, that is people with 10,000 to 100,000 Bitcoin. So that's a lot of Bitcoin, and they're like, their net worth is so heavily skewed towards Bitcoin that, I mean, they need to, everyone needs to spend money to live and kind of fund their lifestyle. So, and we're talking about people with just like so much money, we can't even really fathom how much money they have. So it's like, and then so it makes sense for them to kind of like, take away from some of that self-custody risk and kind of move some into an ETF or whatever it is. But
yeah, if you're moving 10% of your entire Bitcoin holding into something like this, guaranteeing $1 billion for yourself and then still letting another 10, 15, 20 billion just continue to rip in Bitcoin and then diversify out of it. So you can theoretically live off of, I don't know, say $1 billion. I think you're sitting in a pretty position and you have that luxury to do so, versus unless John is sitting on a stack that he won't tell us about, I don't think any of us are anywhere near that type of a position to be able to just say, shaving off 10% of my Bitcoin holdings and putting it into an ETF or some other type of custodial account to live off of tax-free. That's not something that retail is able to do, but retail feels the effects of that in a way that, unfortunately, it feels like, oh my God, price of Bitcoin has crashed. I also think there's a little bit of like sensitivity to the news. Last week, we saw a quick little pump back up to 117K when there were rumors flying around that, oh, Powell's going to cut rates sooner. And then when that flip-flop, we immediately saw the price drop down. So I think there's a lot of sensitivity going on around news right now.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that is fear of people, almost like flashbacks to 2021, and people afraid that we've double topped or whatever it is, and we're, it's like that imminence of, because that was a really rough, crazy bear market in 2022, and I think there's probably a little bit of leftover fear, maybe just from like a retailer just perspective outside of the whale selling, that kind of cascades whenever the price dumps a little bit. People are like, oh, this is it, it's all over.
Yep, there's PTSD there for sure. But even if you go back to looking at like charts like HODL waves, right, about looking at how long people have held, I just pulled it up prior to us jumping on, and still 61% is held for over a year. And again, that number's been higher. It's been north of 70. So we definitely have seen some of the selling. You've seen that happen, but it's not like there's a rush to the exits. You're not seeing that move quite as aggressively. And so, yeah, to call a top here, I think is premature, foolish, and
top.
No, I completely agree. There's way too many bullish headwinds, and especially considering how much the price has gone up with interest rates being high in the U.S., which is crazy, right? That's why when Powell made that, he didn't even make an announcement. He was just slightly dovish and was like, "Oh, we might need to reassess," and then the price jumped up, right? It's because everyone's like waiting for those rates to come down for some money to start flowing again.
And it's not like in September they're not going to cut rates.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's still like 87% chance or something like that. But just to round this out, unless you had something else to say about it, John, you have some more thoughts?
Just one kind of related thing. I did think there was a funny tweet out there. Some of the people who were like, oh, why are these whales selling? It's ridiculous or something like that. It's like, you think it's ridiculous what an OG who's held Bitcoin for 10 years is doing what you plan to do in 10 years.
Yeah. When it's a million, we'll be the ones that are shaving off a little bit.
You only live once. You don't just hoard money and swim around in your money like Scrooge McDuck. So yeah, I think it makes sense. It's explainable. Like overall, I'm not saying the Galaxy one was a little hard to explain in terms of like, why would someone dump 9 billion of Bitcoin that quickly? So like there's nuances that are hard to explain, but the idea of people cashing in, so to speak, their value that they've accumulated over literally a decade or more does make sense. Kind of related to that, I want to just put this one out there for your guys' thoughts. I have the belief that, there's these two camps, right? Of Bitcoin cycles are going to repeat, green, 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 red, blow off top, like all this stuff, right? Or are we in like grind it higher, lower vol, stair step higher, dips are only like 20%. Like those are the two kind of camps, right? I'm starting to be more in the latter camp. I still believe that it's Bitcoin. Adoption events could happen. We could still go to 100, 200K like relatively easily, right? That's obviously possible. But one thing that I just realized recently, which I think is different now versus 4 years ago, I feel like it was super common in 2021 for people to just be like, I am not selling anything ever. And even as that whole thing went down, most people did not sell, that at least that I know, that I talked to. Nowadays, whether it's friends, coworkers, all the clients that we talk to at Swan, which is like literally hundreds and thousands of people, way more people are expressing to me that they plan to trim some as the price gets higher. So number one, I want to know if you guys are kind of having the same types of conversations with people. But then number two, if that's the case, that does support like the grind it higher thesis, because as we get closer to 140, 150, I think there are people out there who are like, okay, take some chips off the table. And this also has been expressed as like the Wall Street is here thesis. This is how Wall Street people think. It's like rebalancing in the shorter term. They're not completely selling their Bitcoin, right? It's not a short-term trade, but like they will take some profits on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, whatever. So that's my latest take of like maybe the grind higher with lower vol camp is looking more and more realistic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I remember these type of conversations starting in March of last year with amongst like at different Bitcoin meetups and events. You'd hear the conversation of like, I think this cycle I'm going to take some off the top and then I'll rebuy on the next dip. I think it's like you see two investor theses played out. To your point, John, I absolutely agree that Wall Street has its own way of sort of trading and taking profits and growing and shaving positions. But then you have the retail side that wants to maximize its returns and maximize the amount of Bitcoin they're going to walk away with. I think ultimately what moves the market is not retail. It's the big money in Wall Street that will kind of dictate the price action because they have the most capital to push the prices to up or down based on what they're doing, more so than if retail decides they want to take profit. So I think we're entering that phase where we are kind of at the behest of the decisions of Wall Street.
Yeah, and all the long-term holders or whales that are selling, that's getting eaten up. Like the supply is getting eaten up. Like if we didn't have the demand that we had through the ETFs and through the treasury companies, buying massive amounts of Bitcoin, you can imagine that the price would be a lot more hit, right? So it's like they're just being gobbled. There's like I think it's what Saylor said, it's like a redistribution, right? That's really what's happening. And this is, I love this take from VJ to kind of round this out, because a lot of this always brings up paper Bitcoin conspiracies and all this kind of stuff, that the price is being suppressed. And VJ just says the price is stalled because a number of whales have hit their magic number and are unloading. This is healthy. Their supply is finite. Their selling is required for the full monetization of Bitcoin. Massive blocks of supply with enormous purchasing power are being distributed to the population. This cycle is one of the greatest monetization events in history. I just love that take, because it's like we actually do want to see coins just distributed from these massive whales that hold hundreds of thousands of coins, right? It's like, if you look at this chart, that's like a pretty big percentage of the supply is still being held by big holders. So we want to see that spread out to those top kind of green and blue at the top there to kind of the general population as much as possible, as long as these treasury companies and Michael Saylor doesn't eat it all up first, right? That's why we gotta share the message with people about why they need to start buying Bitcoin and self-custody it.
Yeah. All right. Before we move on, Isaiah, do you have any quick comment about, do you have people saying to you, I do plan to take profits, trim a little bit, or is it people saying, no, I'm going to borrow against it when we rally? Like how would you characterize it?
I've heard more people say borrow. I think I've had a lot of conversations with people wanting to figure out how to borrow against their Bitcoin. Hey, do you have loan products? What do you think about loan products? What do you think about this specific loan product? And trying to evaluate the different options that are out there. And I think what's going to more likely happen is people are going to take loans when Bitcoin goes at a much higher level. And then those people are going to get margin called and end up with a lot less Bitcoin because they don't want to sell it. there's nothing wrong with selling Bitcoin. If you hold most of your wealth in Bitcoin, you probably will and should sell it. And I think the idea that you should never sell Bitcoin is, to me, rather silly. And there's like certain points of people that will say they'll never sell it, and then surprise, surprise, they do end up selling it. So, don't let someone else make that decision. I think if you get to the point similar to like the OGs, like if you can get to the point where it's life-changing money and makes your family or your life or whatever, like that's the whole purpose of owning that asset. It's not to die with the most Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I've heard a lot more people say they want to take loans. Unfortunately, I think most people are going to take loans at the wrong time in the cycle and get burned again and end up with a lot less Bitcoin. And that'll be unfortunate. And it'll be, PTSD and scars, just like the 2021 bear market was, where they'll be like, I can't be in this, blah, blah, blah. I'm still in the camp personally of everyone's been lulled to sleep of this grind higher, and the ETFs and Wall Street are making everything less volatile. I think we see a lot more volatility still. And I think the volatility is to the upside first, but then we'll rear its head and be on the downside. And I think just in general with any risk asset, a lot of stuff, I think volatility has been dampened, and I think that comes back personally. But I think we go a lot higher first.
I'm going to give a quick shout out to Mara. They are a supporter of the show. And Mara is one of the world's largest Bitcoin miners. They are the largest publicly traded Bitcoin miner. They support the show. They help make Bitcoin the world's most decentralized and secure monetary network. So thank you to Mara. And BTC and DC, it's coming up. This is one of those things where in my head, I was like, oh, end of September, October, that's like so far away, because it was when I first heard about it. And now it's like a month away. It's coming up. It is September 30th and October 1st. It's going to be a great event. Bitcoiners, obviously, lawmakers, different speakers in the space, all going to be in Washington, D.C. So you can literally meet people who are helping shape Bitcoin's future on Capitol Hill. Website is btcindc.com. You can use a code SWAN for 10% off your ticket. Again, September 30th and October 1st. Go to btcindc.com and you can get 10% off with the code SWAN.